Hello, and welcome to this presentation about the men from Scotland who answered the call to arms in 1775. We are talking, of course, about the town of Scotland, Connecticut. And this presentation was researched and recorded specifically for the Samuel Huntington Homestead Museum and the Scotland Historical Society. When I first started researching this, I was a little bit nervous because Scotland is a very small town that didn't technically exist in 1775. It was still part of the larger town of Windham. There's Scotland. It's pretty small, even by today's standard. There's only about 1,600 residents as of the 2020 census. It was incorporated in 1857, so quite a ways after the war. So the problem was going to be how to find which men came from Windham, which men came from Scotland, and how many were there actually from this little place in Connecticut now called Scotland. For such a small town, I was thinking I might only find 2 or 3 names. So that wouldn't have made much of a presentation. So to get started, I looked in the book called Record of Service of Connecticut Men in the Revolutionary War, which was published in 1889. And in that book is a listing of men from Connecticut who responded to the Lexington Alarm in April of 1775. And they do have it broken down by town in that book. So at least I had a place to start. Now, before we continue, I just want to mention this, that there was a plan here in eastern Connecticut, the northern part of the eastern half of the state, where the men who were in the town militias planned to gather in Pomfret, probably because that was the hometown of General Israel Putnam, who was recognized as a military leader even before 1775. So when the Lexington Alarm was received that there had been hostilities between the British and the Patriots in the towns of Lexington and Concord, men gathered in Pomfret. Over 1,000 men showed up. Now, they had no way to transport 1,000 men to Boston area. They had no way to provision them along the way. They had no way to feed them once they got there. So they had to make some choices. And they ended up picking about 200 men to proceed up to Lexington. Now, it's my understanding and belief that basically what they did was choose the best military leaders. For example, Thomas Knowlton of Ashford went along with his entire militia unit intact. And another man that was chosen was Captain John Kingsley, who lived in Windham. And this is the actual list in that book of the men from Windham who proceeded up to Lexington, led by, again, Captain John Kingsley. Now, here we've got 24 total names. So my next problem was how to break them down into men who actually lived in Scotland or were strongly associated with Scotland for this presentation, rather than just making it men from Windham. And I did figure out a way to do that, which we'll talk about later. And this is the list that I came up with. Of those 24 men, 18 of them are associated with the town of Scotland. Of the ones that are missing here, Elijah Simons, Benjamin Holt, Jeduthan Spencer, and Daniel Adams all actually lived elsewhere. But the names Thomas Fitzgerald and Caleb Woodworth, I was not able to find anything about those men. So I might actually add 2 to this list after we do some more research. Also listed in the book was the names of another 176 men from Windham who responded to the alarm but were sent home from Pomfret. They never proceeded. So that's a total of 200 men from the town of Windham who were ready to go and fight at the drop of a hat. So I'm going to take that list and we're just going to briefly give you a little bit of background about these men because they should be remembered, especially in this 250th anniversary celebration year. Uh, Next year is actually the celebration of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, but this year, 2025, is the 250th anniversary of the battles at Lexington and Concord and the Battle of Bunker Hill. So let's talk first about John Kingsley. His gravestone, as you can see there, calls him Deacon John Kingsley. Doesn't say anything about his military service, but he was later promoted to lieutenant. He was baptized in 1733 by Reverend Thomas Clapp, who was the resident minister at that time in Windham. But we can certainly say that he lived in Scotland because his name appears in the original deed from 1731 when they set off a separate church society, which is now the town of Scotland. It was the east part of Windham, beginning at the mouth of Merrick's Brook, where it empties into the Shetucket River, and so running northerly to the southwest corner of the land of John Kingsley, where he now dwells. Now, that happened in 1731. Our guy here was born in 1733, but the John Kingsley mentioned in the deed is the grandfather of this Captain John Kingsley. So, a Scotland man. He led his unit of men to Cambridge in response to the Lexington Alarm. He remained in the service for several years afterwards, specifically was involved in the battles at Frogneck and Kingsbridge, both of those on Long Island. He died in 1813, and he is buried in the Old Scotland Cemetery. Captain Kingsley had, I believe, 6 children. One of them was Rufus Kingsley. He was born in 1763. He enlisted in April 1775. Now, if any of you are math geniuses, you take a look at those 2 dates and you're going to understand that Rufus Kingsley enlisted in the Army at the age of 12. He says it was with the blessings of his parents, but he enlisted as a drummer. He wasn't a soldier in the company led by Captain Obadiah Johnson. In his Revolutionary War pension application, he mentions that he was under arms all day during the Battle of Bunker Hill. Now, he probably was in a unit that was standing by, ready to assist, probably not directly involved in the action, but he was in the area for sure during the Battle of Bunker Hill. He served 8 months with that unit and re-enlisted in 1776 with his father. He was stationed near Fort Washington in New York, and he enlisted 3 additional times in 1777, 1778, and 1779, all of them as a drummer. Drummers were very important during the Revolutionary War. It was the drum beat and the sound of the fifers that actually directed the troops. If you can imagine the roar of the cannons and no direct lines of communication like we know today, there was no telephones, there was no radios. The drums and the fifes are what the soldiers would listen for so that they would know in which direction they were expected to move. So it was really a very important job. He moved along to Susquehanna County in Pennsylvania, and he died there in 1846. And this is his grave there. Salmon Kingsley was a cousin to John Kingsley, not one of his sons. He was baptized February 1756 by Reverend Ebenezer Devotion. And this, I'll tell you now, is how I separated out the men from Scotland. This separate society that was set aside in 1731 was so that people wouldn't have to travel a long ways to go to church. So they established their own church, their own society. And in 1735, they hired the Reverend Ebenezer Devotion as their minister, and he served there a lot of years. So looking up baptismal records, marriage records, I could find the ones that had been baptized or married by Ebenezer Devotion and know that these were Scotland men. Salmon Kingsley was from Scotland, served 30 days in Cambridge, Mass. Under John Kingsley. He married Alethea Smith, a local girl, in 1777 by Reverend James Cogswell. Reverend James Cogswell became the minister in Scotland after the death of Ebenezer Devotion. So that's another name we're going to see quite a bit of. He also ended up moving out of state and died in 1827 in Livonia, Michigan. His brother Jonathan Kingsley was baptized in 1753 by Reverend Ebenezer Devotion. He served 1 month in response to the Lexington Alarm under Colonel Thomas Brown and Lieutenant John Kingsley. He re-enlisted for 7 months under Israel Putnam and served at Cambridge, Massachusetts, then served 4 months with John Kingsley at Frog Neck and Kingsbridge. Again, that's on Long Island. Married Zillah Luce, 1777, by Reverend James Cogswell. He died in Scotland in 1832 and is buried in the Old Scotland Cemetery. Zacchaeus Waldo. Any of you familiar with the area will recognize that name immediately as being a Scotland family. The Waldo House is another one of the historic houses that is open to the public on various weekends. And this is a member of that family. Born in 1756, served 1 month under John Kingsley in response to the Lexington Alarm. He re-enlisted in July 1775 under Jedediah Huntington and was stationed at Roxbury, Massachusetts. He re-enlisted in November 1776 and served 1 month in Providence, re-enlisted in 1777 under Colonel John Durkee of Norwich, Connecticut, and served as a waiter to Major Sanford Kingsbury in Providence for 8 months. Once again enlisted in 1779 for 2 months, serving at Groton and New London. He remained in Scotland for the rest of his life and died there in 1834 and buried in the Old Scotland Cemetery. Elias Robinson, baptized in May 1757 by Reverend Ebenezer Devotion, son of Experience Robinson. He served 1 month in response to the Lexington Alarm. He re-enlisted in 1777 and served as a sergeant under John Durkee. He was later commissioned as ensign and then lieutenant. He served until January 1st, 1782. He married Sybil Lilly, another Scotland name, in August of 1779. She died few years after their marriage, and he remarried to Annis Luce in 1795. He moved just a little ways away. He died in Mansfield, Connecticut on 28 February 1805, and I was not able to locate his burial place. Levi Robinson was his cousin, baptized in 1751 by Reverend Ebenezer Devotion. He was the son of Asa Robinson. He served 1 month in response to the Lexington Alarm. He re-enlisted in May 1775 for 7 months under General Israel Putnam. He re-enlisted again in 1783 for the duration of the war. However, the war was just about over by then, so he only served 3 months at that time. He married Lavina Blackman in December of 1780 and died in the town of Windham in 1824. And I was not able to locate his grave either. Corporal Hosea Smith. His gravestone's in kind of rough shape there, but that's it. He was baptized in 1747 by Reverend Ebenezer Devotion, served 1 month in response to the Lexington Alarm. In December 1775, he enlisted for 3 months in Colonel Douglas's regiment under Captain Stedman. In 1777, he was drafted for 3 months and served at Providence, Rhode Island. And in 1778, he was drafted for 2 months at New London. Drafted again later in 1778 and served for 3 more years. He married Eunice Palmer, Christmas Day, 1776, and died in 1835 and is buried in Old Scotland Cemetery. Dan Manning, and it is Dan. He's not ever listed as Daniel or any longer name. It's always Dan Manning. He was baptized in 1753 by Ebenezer Devotion. He married Lydia Peters in 1775, and they were married by Reverend James Cogswell in Scotland. He served 24 days in response to the Lexington Alarm. He reenlisted the 1st of May, 1775, in Captain Mosley's company of General Israel Putnam's regiment. He was at Bunker Hill on June 17th, 1775. April of 1776, he enlisted in Captain Sharp's company, Colonel Mott's regiment. He served at Fort Ticonderoga and Fort Anne. Enlisted again in April 1778, discharged January 1779. During that time, he served at West Point and White Plains, both of those, of course, along the Hudson River in New York State. He ended up moving north up into Vermont and died in Poultney in 1836. Captain Zebulon Hubbard. You can find that name spelled a variety of ways in records. It made him a little bit harder to track down, but we found a few facts out about him. He was an older fellow at the time of the 1775 actions. He was born in 1715, married in 1737, served 9 days in response to the Lexington Alarm. He died in July 1792 and is buried in the Palmertown Cemetery in Scotland. In his probate record, his property is described as abutting the land of His Excellency Samuel Huntington. So, of course, that places him directly in Scotland. Sergeant John Baker was born September of 1747, baptized that year by Reverend Ebenezer Devotion. Married Elizabeth Manning, starting to recognize a lot of these surnames. They keep popping up. In 1775 by Reverend James Cogswell. He served 1 month in response to the Lexington Alarm. He reenlisted in September 1777 for the duration of the war under Captain Mills Company in the 2nd Connecticut Battalion, later transferred to David Parsons Company, and then again to the 3rd Connecticut Regiment. He served at White Plains and the Highlands. Again, that's along the Hudson River in New York State. He was promoted to corporal in 1780 and then to sergeant later that same year. Returned to Scotland, where he died in 1828 and is buried in the Old Scotland Cemetery. Nathaniel Rudd was baptized in 1753 by Ebenezer Devotion. Married Martha Bingham in 1777 by Reverend James Cogswell. Definitely a Scotland man. Served 24 days in response to the Lexington Alarm, where he was served guarding wounded British soldiers. He reenlisted May 1775 for 6 months, served in Cambridge. He actually was there for 7 months. He was requested to serve an additional month, and he did so. He then reenlisted for another 3 months at Roxbury. Cambridge and Roxbury, of course, are towns on the hill surrounding Boston, where the Patriots were camped out, making sure that the British soldiers who were camped in Boston would stay in Boston and hopefully leave Boston. He reenlisted in July 1776 and marched to Fort Ticonderoga for 3 months. Again in 1777, he enlisted to aid in stopping General Burgoyne and served until the surrender at Saratoga. He ended up moving to Massachusetts, where he died in 1845 in the town of Becket. Dr. Penuel Cheney, born in 1748 in Sturbridge, Massachusetts, but he was in Scotland by 1771 when he married Jerusha Manning. They were married by Reverend Ebenezer Devotion. Served 1 month in response to the Lexington Alarm. He was in Providence during January and February 1778. And during all this time, he was serving as the surgeon of these various companies and regiments. 1779, he became the surgeon in the Connecticut state troops under Samuel McClellan. He died in Scotland in 1810, and he is also buried in Old Scotland Cemetery. Sergeant Jonathan Carey. He was baptized in 1749 by Ebenezer Devotion. His parents were John Carey and Rebecca Rudd. Again, we're seeing those same surnames over and over. He married Martha Hurlburt in 1775 by Reverend James Cogswell. Served 1 month in response to the Lexington Alarm. Served at Providence, Rhode Island in 1776 and 1777. He later moved to the town of Norwich in Connecticut, where he died in 1818, and I do not know where he is buried. Corporal Samuel Bingham, baptized in 1753 by Ebenezer Devotion. Married Alethea Hubbard. In 1778, they were married by James Cogswell. He served 1 month in response to the Lexington Alarm. Later that year, he enlisted in Jedediah Huntington's regiment and served 5 months in Roxbury. In 1777, he enlisted in Colonel John Latimer's regiment for 2 months, where he fought at Fort Ticonderoga and was later discharged at Albany, New York. He apparently liked New York because he moved there later, where he died in 1845. Levi Carey, baptized 1754 by Ebenezer Devotion, served 26 days in response to the Lexington Alarm, served 9 months at Cambridge during 1775, and reenlisted in March 1776 for 1 year in Colonel John Durkee's regiment. He served at Cambridge and White Plains, was discharged in April 1777. He re-upped in 1779, served for 2 years and 3 months in Colonel Jeduthan Baldwin's artillery company. He was an artificer. Died 1845 in Oswego County, New York. Turner Lilly. I've got a typo there. He was born in October 1755, not 75, son of Jonathan and Hannah Tilden Lilly. And he was married in 1754. His parents were married in 1754 by Reverend Ebenezer Devotion. He served 27 days in response to the Lexington Alarm, reenlisted in May under General Israel Putnam, and served until December 1775. I'm just going to take a minute here to explain. You see a lot of these enlistments after their 1 month service in response to the Lexington Alarm. Many of them enlisted in these regular units under Israel Putnam or under John Durkee or Jedediah Huntington. All of that ended in December 1775 after General Washington took charge of the Army. He disbanded all of these military units and reorganized them, often under the same officers, but just a reorganization. So almost everybody was discharged in December 1775 and would have reenlisted if they wished to, either the next spring or perhaps even later than that. But he reenlisted in May 1776 under Captain John Kingsley, and he served 6 months, enlisted February 1777 for 8 months, enlisted February 1778 for a year under Colonel Samuel Willis, where he served at White Plains in New York. He ended up going to Canada, where he died in Ontario in 1801. Jabez Webb was baptized in 1753 by Ebenezer Devotion. His mother was a Devotion, who had married John Webb. He married Elizabeth Smith in Ashford, Connecticut, nearby town, in 1776. He served 27 days in response to the Lexington Alarm, and he and his wife apparently lived in her hometown of Ashford, where he died in 1823. John Burnham, born 1749 in the town of Hampton, Connecticut, which is also very nearby. He was the son of Ebenezer and Martha Burnham. He married Tryphena Robinson, a Scotland woman, in October of 1777. They were married by James Cogswell. He served 1 month in response to the Lexington Alarm. He re-enlisted in the fall of 1775 under Colonel John Durkee and served near Boston until March of 1776. Then his unit went to New York City, across the North River to the Jersey Shore. They proceeded to Pennsylvania and crossed the Delaware River with General Washington. March of 1777, he was wounded at Princeton, taking a musket ball through his left arm. He was discharged at Morristown shortly thereafter, drafted for 1 month in October of 1778, and served at New London and Groton. He and his wife apparently returned to the town of Hampton, where he died in 1833 and is buried there in South Cemetery. Now, I mentioned at the beginning that there was another 176 men who volunteered for Windham, but weren't actually picked to go to Lexington. I did not go through that entire list, but two names kind of jumped out at me. Not sure why they're on the list of people who didn't go, because I have records showing that they actually did respond to the Lexington Alarm. So I'm just going to mention those two. One is Jonathan Rudd, baptized in 1743 by Reverend Ebenezer Devotion, and he married Mary Tracy in 1766. He served 4 days in response to the Lexington Alarm as ensign. In 1778, he enlisted under Colonel Chapman for 43 days and served at Newport, Rhode Island. This was the Battle of Rhode Island when they were attempting to drive the British out of Newport. He died in 1823 in Scotland, and he is buried in Old Scotland Cemetery, but I do not believe he has a stone there. And the other one is Lieutenant Jonah Palmer. He was born in Windham in 1731. Now, remember, Scotland society was not yet broken off. He died in 1802. He married Abia Robinson in 1754, and they were married by Ebenezer Devotion. And he is buried in Scotland, Old Scotland Cemetery. And the last guy I'm going to talk about here is associated with the town of Scotland, and he was also involved in the Battle at Bunker Hill. I don't know if he was actually taking part in the battle itself, but I have seen things that call him the hero of Bunker Hill. There's also about 20 other men who are called the hero of Bunker Hill, so that's kind of a personal opinion, I guess. But he was baptized in 1753 in the town of Hampton, Connecticut. His involvement in Bunker Hill was an engineering involvement. He assisted in placing the fortifications before the battle. I read his application for his Revolutionary War service pension, and he does not mention being involved in the battle at Bunker Hill. He did enlist, however, in 1775 in Colonel John Durkee's regiment. He served at Trenton, New Jersey. He enlisted for another month in January 1777 for the battle at Princeton, New Jersey. He married Abigail Meacham in 1777. They were married in the town of Hampton, but their marriage record mentions they are both of Windham. So he does have that Scotland connection. He died in 1834 in Hampton and is buried there in their South Cemetery. So that is my presentation of the men from the little town of Scotland, Connecticut, the wee town, who served during the beginning of the hostilities between the Patriots and the British in the year 1775. You notice that almost all of these men went on to serve in other terms other than just in 1775. They were truly patriots. They didn't just go and try it out and quit. They kept on going back. So, if you have any questions, please direct them to either the Scotland Historical Society or stop in someday at the Samuel Huntington Homestead Museum, open May through October on the first and third Saturdays from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Thank you.